morning, everybody, and welcome to our Friday Live Pulp Literature reading for the 19th of June. Happy Juneteenth to all our friends down in the States. And happy Indigenous Day this weekend, and happy Pride Month, everybody. So today we have with us Leo X Robertson coming to us from Stavanger in Norway. We have Robin Malcom coming to us from West Africa. And we have Brandon Crilly over in Ottawa. So all points of the globe here this morning. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Hiya.
So we'll have readings from all these three authors this morning. If you have questions out there in audience land, please type them into the YouTube chat. And I've got my colleague Mel Anastasia backstage. She will pass those over to us and I will pass them on to the authors. So we love questions. Send in your questions, send in your comments as well. So first up, we've got Leo Robertson. So Leo is a process engineer, writer, filmmaker, and he's, as I said, currently living in Stavanger, Norway. He is Scottish, however. His story, Snapshots, was published in issue 22. That was spring last year. And it's also coming out in the Best of British Science Fiction for 2019, so congratulations on that. He's also had short stories in the year's Best Hardcore Horror Volume 5, Flame Tree Publishing, as well as novellas published by Unnerving Magazine, Nihilism Revised, and forthcoming with Aurelia Leo. His latest book, Grieve, is a story with all the mothers in the city of Los spontaneously die. I'm not sure I'm down with that, being a mother. But a team of scientists stumble upon technology that will bring anyone back to life. So that's intriguing right there. I'll put his links up in the YouTube chat, and you can find out more from there. But for now, I'm going to hand the mic over to Leo.
Cheers. Hi. Can you all hear me? So great. So yes, so I'm going to read a little bit from my story, Snapshots. It's about a dad who keeps a set of holograms of his son in a special room called Snap Room. And the son is there at age 25 interacting with them. And the other holograms are age 5, 15, 19, and 21. And I dedicated this story to my dad because it was one of the last things of mine that he read and enjoyed. So here you go. I'll go ahead with my reading. Over our lunches at the restaurant that overlooks the golf course, Dad has told me countless times that 5 is a special early fragment of a tech with boundless applications. 19 interrupts 5. Ugh, marriage. He slumps down on the brushed aluminium wall. Are we that conventional? He scratches his bald head. I had long hair for most of that year, but shaved it off just before I turned 20. Dad so enjoyed that act of bravery that he kept it for the snapshot. 19 has a point. Flossie's friends are all getting married, and it does seem like it's our turn. But it's all any life event is. Our turn. That's the weird thing about Snap Room. I come here sometimes just to see how far I progress, but my former selves can be insightful. In the end, I'm the same as these kids in front of me once were. I improvise some approximation of a life in the face of epic choices I feel too small to make. Thought we'd have spent a few more years single, 19 continues, riding suicide over the Magno rails between cities, living off the land. What an insufferably idealistic dream. It's so painful to look at my own smug face from that age, its insincere smile, the whole snake-like hooded-eye brooding thing I always did. I thought I knew so much more than everyone, rambling on about how I should have been born in the 1960s. I extolled the potential joy of living out of a Volkswagen van when I wouldn't even join Dad on his weekly hikes. Can you even play the guitar any better than I can, 19 adds. I shake my head with feigned dismay. 19 can tell. The last person he needs treating his pursuits as a silly phase is himself. It's cruel of me to hang out with these guys, really. They derive so much hope from the it gets better potential of the different futures they envisage. Here I am, the finite reality, robbing them of that hope simply by existing. I frown at 19 and say, we have a happy life? Fantastic, he says, pushing himself up the wall with his feet, grazing its paneling, his arms firmly folded. I'm sure that makes us all so memorable. People will flock here to meet us one day. Come hang out with this guy's Snapshots, for here lies a man who was once happy. They used to visit Snap Room, Dad's golfers and B&B guests. Later, Snapshots Soft LLC's patented Hollow Project technology became reasonably priced. Now everyone has their own snapshots. It's hard to see even these first iterations as meaningful, what with proliferation like that. What's that sound? Oh, I cringe as Dad sings some made-up tune to himself while playing an air guitar. Hey, 19, remember letting your dad take you to see the Mechabots in concert? When the drummer closed with that 10-minute solo and his platform rose up into the air? Then all those fireworks launched out of the bass? You'd never seen anything like it. He smiles. I watched you watch them, the light of the sparklers in your eyes. 19 sighs. No one else wanted to go with me. Your guitar's here at the club, up in the attic. Will you teach me how to play if I bring it down? Oh, come on, Dad, I say. Why would you want to do that? 19 ignores us both. How do you think 25 is doing, 15? 15 is 19's favourite, even though they make each other bluer, their neuroses feeding off one another. Honestly, 15 says, loosening his tie, I can't believe we even have a girlfriend. An eternity in school uniform. Why not? That's what 15's existence felt like. This is an age I wouldn't repeat. On my mental to-do list for most of it was find any bearable direction for life, hide misery from others, try not to kill self, will to live pending. Pending lasted months until I witnessed the purple balloon of my own pee bursting across Terry Corrigan's sour face at the high school graduation. It was a petty humiliation to cap the many he put me through. Wherever keeps you going, I say. Dad tries to pinch 15's cheeks. True, you didn't have anyone to go out gallivanting with, but it worked out great for me. We spent weekends playing backgammon together. He clicks his tongue in thought. And you had so much to be proud of. A handsome young gent with your whole life ahead of you. I wish you could have seen that. It wasn't so simple. I kept all my suffering internal at that age. I guess that's one reason why Dad holds on to 15. He has happier memories with me than I have with myself. I'm glad in a way, but shouldn't I have enjoyed my own company at least as much as anyone else? Dad gasps. Fancy beating your old man at backgammon again? I'll bring a set. Just tell me where to move your pieces. 21 slicks his brown hair out of his face and snaps his fingers. Oh yeah, he laughs. How quaint to think of the age before girlfriends. Don't worry, 15. Let's just say you make up for lost time. 19 takes 5's little hand and pulls him closer, blue sparks flying from their fingertips. The wireframe shape of their holograms burst through as the room's computer struggles to interpret the crashing together. 19 glowers at 21, who says, what's the big deal? 21, the edgy, all-black wearing, experienced collecting party boy. Never missed a club night out, memorized album reviews on obscure websites, then spouted them at friends to impress. When I look at him, I feel the elbows of all those partygoers in my ribs, the tinnitus of blaring techno rings in my ears, the sugary film of vodka mixers coats my teeth, the frozen fear of waking up in a field and muddy clothes jagged through my chest. At least he kept me alive, but should I attribute that to him or luck? I think that's 5 minutes.
That was great. Thank you so much. Great reading.
Cheers.
For those of you who haven't read to the end of the story yet, it's got a gut punch of an ending, and it's well worth continuing on. But I wanted to ask you, what made you come up with the idea for this story? All these different ages of characters and...
There was a few different inspirations. I think there's this Beckett play called Krapp's Last Tape, which is about an elderly man who listens to earlier tape versions of himself. And I wondered what the sci-fi equivalent of that would be and how you could update it. And then I thought, well, if you could probably have holograms of your earlier selves alive and talking to you, and that would be like taking that concept and taking it further.
Yeah, it's a fabulous sci-fi idea. It's just a great concept. And how did you decide on the ages for the different snapshot characters?
Good question. I was thinking of my own age and like ages at which I could conceivably be said to be like different people, because that's one of the ideas of the story, I guess, is that you're trying to, pay tribute to all these former people that you were, but you're always changing at the same time. So I think these are kind of galvanizing ages of my own, I guess.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to talk to former versions of myself, but they would probably we'd all find each other insufferable, as your characters do. And have you thought about expanding this concept into a novel at all?
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, if someone wants to take the success of the story and pay me to do that, yeah, sure. Be cool. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much more you could do with it. I could like create other ages. I could go into the history of the father-son relationship. Yeah, I definitely have thought of it. It might be something I do one day.
I would definitely read that if it came out. So thank you so much. Stick around till the end, and I am going to bring Robin Malcom onto the stage now. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you.
So Robin Malcolm's muse is a hoarder, she says, collecting ideas from all the places she's lived and piling them up in a corner in case she needs them. Her short story, The Bumblebees Daughter, won the Surrey International Writers Conference Storyteller Award in 2018. And as always, we published the winners of that contest. And so it appeared in issue 24, which was fall of last year. Her story, The Chapel in the Mud, was shortlisted for the same award in 2017. So she's no stranger to that contest. And in recent days, she's been working on a memoir of her life in Africa and a novel about growing up in the Vietnam era. And so, Robin, tell us a little bit about The Bumblebees Daughter and what inspired that, and give us a reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in 2000, my family and I went to France to do a year of language study. And we studied in the French Alps. And while we were there, we were aware of this town up in the mountains called Tignes that had been flooded when the French government built a dam in the 1950s. And at that point in time, every 20 years, they drained the dam and they would to do repairs on the dam, but then you could go and visit the town, which was still under the lake. So we got the chance to go and see this town. And it always stuck with me, just what would it be like to have been from this town, to see it after all this time revealed from under the lake. And so that was the inspiration for this story. The story begins in 1983, but it has timelines that weave all the way back to World War II. And so I'm going to read just the very first part of the story called The Bumblebees Daughter. Savoie, France, 1983. Sabine de Rosier did not believe in ghosts. The idea of transparent apparitions lurking in corridors was the stuff of fancy. She believed in the tangible, but the fact was she was haunted, and on her darkest days she was forced to admit that her mother's words were specter-like. They teased her, followed her, driving her back to the last place she wanted to go, back to the village of her childhood. Sabine, go back to Tignes. She walked across the moonscape of a lake bed gouged from the French Alps. Behind her, an imposing dam spanned the valley, attended to by a swarm of maintenance equipment. Before her, the skeleton of a town exposed by the draining of a reservoir lay in its grave under a cloud-filtered sun. A shovel resting on her shoulder, Sabine avoided the scattered tourists. She marveled at the tarmac under her boots, intact after 30 years underwater. The soles of her shoes had walked this road 1,000 times, shopping with Maman on the way to school or to church. The boulangerie had toppled, though she thought she caught a whiff of baking baguettes. A caved-in roof marked the grocer's where Beaufort cheese, fresh pears, and bundles of leeks had once been displayed. Of the proud hotel that had hosted skiers and other visitors, only the ground floor still stood, its stone walls like the ribcage of a long-dead memory. Bonjour, mademoiselle. She started at the man's sudden appearance. He was as thin as the branch of a willow, wearing a frayed woolen coat and trousers that sagged at the knees. His greeting had been that of a man who knew her, and then realized he did not, but he regained himself quickly, tipping his hat to reveal a head of silver. Angelo Donati at your disposition. Bonjour, Monsieur Donati. Just Angelo, if you please. Sabine, she murmured, enchantée. He eyed the shovel slung over her shoulder. Tell me, mademoiselle, are you an archaeologist come to dig among the ruins of Tignes? No. Her light laugh belied her nervousness, and she surveyed the landscape, looking for police who might forbid her to dig. I was born in this village. Ah, so you are looking for buried treasure, a memory of your childhood, then? He considered the mud-caked ruins before them. In a manner of speaking. He had struck close to the truth, though she did not know what she had come for. She only heard her mother's self-reproach playing in her head like crumbs left behind from a dream. Je regrette. Maman's hand had plucked at the bed covers. I'm sorry, Sabine. Sabine had taken her mother's hand gently, the skin paper thin, brutalized by the chemotherapy. You regret what? We should have told you. Her mother coughed, a racking sound that seemed to come from her soul. We only meant to protect you from pain. I'm sorry. We should have told you. Told me what? But Mama had yielded to sleep. Even in sleep she had been troubled, sporadically uttering delirious words. Sabine had waited, her grief ebbing and flowing. She had been singing a childhood lullaby when her mother's eyes had flown open. Loreton, find Loreton. The monitors had started beeping frantically, mirroring the desperate racing of her mother's heart. Go back to Teen, chérie. He's under the hearthstones. Monsieur Donati cleared his throat lightly. He had taken a step to the side, perhaps having noticed her momentary drift into memory and not wishing to intrude on her private thoughts. The ghost passed her by quickly, and she pointed to an unrecognizable jumble of stones as high as her head. This was the church, she said. A small cluster of tourists formed at their back, drawn to her words like ants to a bit of cake. Their faces were sympathetic, and they pointed their long-lensed cameras at the rubble. You grew up here, madame? Tell us of the church. Sabine paused, raising her eyes out of the underworld to the slopes high above, where the ski resorts and hotels winked at her with quicksilver windows. This church was built in the 17th century. It was the last building they knocked down. She coughed, the spirit of diesel fumes still burning her throat. They left all the smaller ones. She told them of the machines that had shaken the earth under her feet, how they had crushed the fragrant orchids and the tiny forget-me-nots her mother had planted in the churchyard. She told them of the contractors that had come from Paris to relocate the graves to the new town, and how the villagers had watched soberly as their dead were evicted alongside the living. She did not, however, tell them of the grave marking the resting place of an elderly woman found to contain not one coffin, but two, a tiny one tucked underneath a full-size one. Nor did she speak of how Maman had inexplicably wept at the discovery, and Papa had embraced her and said, Do not cry, Marceline, she is safe. Instead, she shook off the memory like a dog shakes off water droplets. They removed the church bell, but the nearby villagers say they still hear it ringing. Superstition, one of the tourists whispered to the child behind him. It was 1952. France needed electricity. The dam was progress. Then he turned his lens to the serpentine trails left by the skiers high on the slopes. The tourist melted away. Monsieur Donati folded his hands behind his back. I remember the church bell. So I'm going to stop right there.
That was a lovely reading. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
I love those two characters, and I love the fact that you shift back and forth between their points of view in the story. And a question from the audience. So it was fascinating to hear about the drained lake village, but where did the World War II mystery aspect come in?
That came in as I started to do some research about the story. So when I started the story at first, in my head, it was going to be completely different than it came out. And Sabine was walking through the town and she met this man, and I didn't really know who he was or what he was doing or whether he was important. I only knew that he was older than her. So I started to do some real research about that area, not just the history of the dam, and there was a lot of opposition to the building of the dam in that area, but I also did some research on what it looked like during World War II in that actual part of France. And I discovered that there was a lot of activity going on there, not only resistance activity, but also a lot of smuggling of Jewish people out of France into Italy. And the more I researched, the more what I found just played right into the story. Just all the pieces kind of fell together perfectly to tell the story, not only Sabine's story, but Angelo's story as well. So his story is also wrapped up in this village, but his timeline is about 10 years behind hers. And that's where the World War II aspect comes in.
Oh, I love that. I love that when stories kind of write themselves and lead you down paths that you weren't expecting.
Absolutely. It was magic.
It really is. So stick around in case we have more questions at the end. And
Okay.
We're going to bring our last author onto the stage now. So please welcome Brandon Crilly. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I should have checked before. Is it Cree or Crilly?
Crilly. You had it right the first time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Brandon is an Ottawa teacher by day. He's previously been published by Daily Science Fiction, Abyss and Apex, OnSpec, Flame Tree Publishing, and other markets. His short story, Clearing Out Nests, we published back in the fall of 2017. 2017, yeah, that was right. A Pulp Literature Issue 16. His first comic, True Balance, was published by Marcosia Press in 2020 and is available on Comixology. He received an honorable mention in the 2016 Writer's Digest Popular Fiction Awards, and he reviews fiction for Blackgate and serves as programming lead for CanCon in Ottawa, so deeply connected with the science fiction fantasy community. With Evan May, he's a co-host of the podcast Broadcast from the Wasteland, which he describes as eavesdropping on a bunch of writers at the hotel bar. So welcome, Brandon.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your story and then give us a reading.
All right. So Clearing Out Nests, I love the description that was given in the issue that came out, and it's described as discovering the ghoulish side of gentrification, which I love the way those words come together, because it is very much this very short story about two individuals who know that there are ghouls living beneath their city, and there are periodic attacks and infestations, usually in commercial buildings. These two characters, Hannah and Willis, get an inkling that there might be something else going on, which gets hinted at in the first part of the story. So I won't say more than that. I'll just read the first couple of pages. But I got to give a shout out to Mel, who did this awesome illustration, as she does for Pulp Literature of a Coffee Shop, which I absolutely loved when I saw it.
Oh, I can bring that up on screen.
Oh, that'd be great. All right, so this is just the first scene from Clearing Out Nests. Hannah triple-checked that she had cleaned all the dried blood off her skin before she left the restroom. No one in the coffee shop had noticed it when she walked in, so focused were they on their conversations or smartphones. There had only been a few patches of gore. She thought about sitting down at the counter to see how long it took for someone to give her a weird look. Or scream. Willis would have killed her, though, if she tried that, so her bloody shirt and pants went into her backpack to join the pile of similar laundry waiting at home. A steaming cup of coffee was waiting for her at the long counter that looked out on the street. Willis had a newspaper in front of him, but that was just for show. Between sips of herbal tea, his eyes were on the empty building across the street, one hand resting near the duffel bag that held their weapons. The place across the street had been a clothing store before a couple of unexplained deaths led to it closing down. There was a gap in the polite for lease signs lining the windows, but if no one had seen Hannah take it down with her when one of the ghouls threw her across the interior, she doubted anyone would bat an eye now. Nothing, I'm guessing? Hannah asked. Not a peep. Hannah took a careful sip of coffee, but the motion still made her throat ache where that ghoul had grabbed her. She grimaced, and Willis shook his head. Please don't start already. You should have gone left, Willis said. He licked drips of tea from his shock-white mustache. Are you really going to criticize me for making the wrong choice on a 50-50 chance? If you thought I should have gone left, maybe you could have shouted or something, because going right seemed perfectly fine to me at the time. Willis grunted. You're being too loud. Like anyone would care, Hannah murmured. She glanced around. The patrons in here had been 2 lanes of traffic away from a nest of ghouls that would have gladly ripped their faces off and danced in their skin, but of course they had no clue and would go on with their blissfully ignorant lives thanks to people like Hannah and Willis. In fact, she looked past the tables and signs advertising fancy coffee to examine the coffee shop's basic layout. Have we been here before? Willis's eyes shifted slightly to study the reflection in the window while he kept half his attention on the other building. We have cleared this place out 8 months ago or something. Huh. Hannah frowned. This had been something else before it was a coffee shop. sporting goods, maybe, before the ghouls moved into the basement. It didn't take them long to stake a claim, as though the city needed another place like this. It was one of those chains that seemed to show up on every street corner. Capitalism, Willis said, like that answered everything. Hannah decided her throat hurt too much to keep talking and focused on her overpriced coffee.
Thank you, Brandon. I love that story. I always love revisiting stories that it's been a while, a couple of years since I read them, and I do enjoy those two characters. It is kind of ironic now that Starbucks has just announced it's closing something like 400 shops across the country.
I know, I read that the other day. It totally ruins my story.
It does. Luckily, it came out in 2017, so you're good.
Yeah, exactly.
Mel just said, she just posted here, glad you like your illustration. So what was the inspiration for that story? Just the proliferation of coffee shops, or just...
that was part of it. It was a combination of things. One, I've always been a fan of monster hunting sort of stories. I will admit that Supernatural has been one of my guilty pleasures for a long time, as much as it's far from a perfect show. It was that combined with I went to university in Kingston, and right near the campus for Queen's University, there were coffee shops everywhere. And at one point you could walk downtown and there was literally Starbucks across the street from each other. And I just remember looking at that and then going back and seeing even more Starbucks and thinking that not only is that ridiculous, but how interesting would it be if there was something sinister to it aside from corporate power and capitalism and monopolies. And so I just kind of riffed off of that and ended up settling on ghouls, which give it a little bit of a fun twist.
Yeah, we have a corner in Vancouver as well, a corner of, I think, Robson and Thurlow. I don't know if it still does, but Starbucks on either corner. And the local chapters, when we still had chapters, had a Starbucks inside it and a separate location in the parking lot.
Yeah, well, I can believe that.
Market saturation. But,
yeah, exactly.
Well, it was a great story. So I'm going to bring all three of our guests back on now. Oh, Robin seems to have frozen. Oh dear. Let me just bring the two of you back then. Hopefully we can get her back. Oh, now she's unfrozen as soon as I take her off. There we go.
I'm here.
You're here. So we've just got a minute left. So I wanted to ask the three of you the question that I asked everybody, and that is, what are you working on next? So let's start from left to right. We'll start with Leo.
Well, loads of stuff. So I printed there's a bunch of 5 different novella story thingies. This is just all the notes I have.
Oh,
wow. I thought if I print it, maybe I'll actually do something with them. So I worked on printing these. I also, although I did make an entire feature film during lockdown.
That's amazing.
I wrote it and I directed it from here, and it's everyone on their webcams, and it's about the end of the world. And I made the first edit, and we'll do a test screening with everyone who's in it next week. We're going to send it out to film festivals and see how that goes.
Is there somewhere where people can find it, once it's out? Or just
So we're going to...
I mean, I know it'll be going to film festival. Is there somewhere where people can find information about it other than your website?
Hopefully, yeah. Okay, so we have stavangerfilmmakers.wordpress.com. Okay. And I'll be making my producer put some stuff on that for anyone who wants to know about the film.
Okay.
I'd made a rough edit of it yesterday, and that was exciting because I can almost see what it's going to look like. And that was a very cool experience.
That's great. Send me the link to that as well, and I will put that up on the YouTube channel so people can find it.
Cool.
So Robin, what's next for you?
Well, right now on deck is to finish this memoir that I've started. So we first came to Africa in 2000, and the first couple of years that we were here were just really rough. We went through a lot of trauma. We had some physical assaults. We had some sickness. We ended up getting stuck in the middle of a civil war, and had to be evacuated by French and U.S. troops. So I'm working on a memoir that's just kind of the story. I say it's the story of what happened to me in Africa and why I came back anyway. So that's kind of my priority right now. But I have a couple novels and fiction works in the work. One is a novel that's based on the story of my mother's life growing up. So growing up in the U.S. through the Vietnam era. And then kind of next on deck, or just starting to do the research, would be to take this story, the one that I read, and expand it into a full-length novel.
Oh, that would be cool.
So,
well,
just the beginning stages of that. There's a lot I don't know.
Well, I'm excited for your memoir too, because that sounds like quite a read.
Thank you.
I love to read things like that. And not have to live through them myself. But
well, I'm glad to share my experiences.
And Brandon, what's next for you?
So aside from some novel revisions that I'm about the final stage on and desperately finishing all my marking before the end of June, my podcast that you mentioned, Broadcasts from the Wasteland, we're actually in the middle of our second season right now. We took a little bit of a break through June out of respect to protest movements in Canada and the United States, so we could signal boost that and not take away from any audience. So we've got 2 more episodes for season 2 that'll be coming out at the end of the month. And then it'll be more short fiction work and novel revisions and stuff like that. And so the podcast is Broadcasts from the Wasteland. On Twitter, it's BFTW Podcast, if anybody wants to check it out.
All right. And do you have links to that on your website?
I do, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and there's a separate website for it as well. If you type in Broadcasts from the Wasteland, it should be the first thing that comes up.
Wonderful. Oh, well, thank you so much, everybody. It's been a delight listening to you read this morning. This really does brighten my day on a Friday. So stay well, have a wonderful weekend, and to our audience out there, we'll see you again next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.